Hi, welcome to the JAMA Medical News Summary for December 2019. I'm Becky Voker.
And I'm Jenna Bossi.
And today, the first story we're going to be talking about is one of my favorite features in the medical news section, and that's the articles of the year that Jen initiated a few years ago. So Jen, what did you find out for this year?
So this is a story, like you said, we've done for a few years now. And so what it is we review the top viewed article from each of the JAMA network journals that have been published over a recent 12-month period. So specifically between September 2018 and August 2019. And so we're going to talk about today just a few of the articles that made the top of the list. So the most viewed article over the last 12 months was in our journal, JAMA Network Open, our open access journal, and it was about push-up capacity and cardiovascular events in firefighters. So the findings were basically that firefighters that could do 11 or more push-ups had a lower risk of cardiovascular disease up to a decade later, compared with those that could do fewer. And those who could do 40 or more had even lower risks. And so the editor of JAMA Network Open mentioned that the popularity of this article reflects what he called the remarkable interest in lifestyle medicine. Over 500,000 people viewed this article online.
There is a lot of interest in lifestyle medicine. What I wonder about, though, is we may think of firefighters as a little bit more fit because of the physical nature of their job than the general public. So it really would be interesting to see a study that may compare the firefighters with the general public, because as a lot of us know, 2/3 of the American public is either overweight or obese. And so this is a special population, but it would be great to see that kind of fitness level in the general public too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can do 11 push-ups.
I can do about 2.
We might have to have a push-up contest. Okay, so the next top viewed article was published in JAMA Internal Medicine, and that was on I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, anticholinergic drug exposure and the risk of dementia. And so this study found a dose-response association between dementia and any type of anticholinergic drug, which is a broad group of drugs that includes antihistamines, antidepressants, antipsychotics, and meds used for gastrointestinal and bladder disorders. And the editor of JAMA Internal Medicine told me that these findings are definitely practice-changing and could lead doctors to dramatically curtail use of these drugs. So it could be a big deal.
It could be a big deal. And we have more physical activity information here, too.
The third top viewed article, which was in JAMA, our flagship journal, was the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, which is the first update since they were originally released. And so this time, the guidelines especially emphasize the importance of reducing sedentary time. So the public is encouraged to swap some sitting time for ideally moderate to vigorous physical activity. And another change in this version is that even really short spurts of activity, like even less than 10 minutes, now count towards physical activity goals. So anything, if it's just a few minutes walking from your car into the store now counts, according to these guidelines. And the editor of JAMA, Dr. Bachner, emphasized that physical activity is an important part of life, and it's something that physicians should be emphasizing all of the time to all of their patients.
I especially like the short spurts of activity, that counts now toward your exercise goals.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging for a lot of people.
Definitely.
Okay, so finally, we'll talk about the fourth top viewed article published over the last year, which was in JAMA Pediatrics. So this one was super interesting because it was about fluoride exposure in pregnant women and how that was associated with IQ in their offspring a few years later. And so this is water fluoridation is what this was about, and that's a very controversial topic and has been for a long time. And so what this study found was that mothers in Canada who had higher fluoride exposures during pregnancy went on to have 3 to 4-year-old children with lower IQ scores, and that was specifically in boys. The association was not seen in girls. And they controlled for factors like maternal age and education, gestational age of the child, and the quality of the home environment. And so the editor of JAMA Pediatrics told me that, quote, most pediatricians, myself included, have been trained to believe that there is no merit to the arguments that fluoride is a potential toxin, and this article suggests otherwise. And because of the controversial nature of this topic, he wrote an editor's note explaining the decision to publish the study in JAMA Pediatrics, and he devoted a podcast episode to it. Interestingly, I also wanted to point out that JAMA Pediatrics also published a research letter this year that got a lot less attention also on fluoride. And it was the first U.S. study to show evidence that water fluoridation attenuates income-related inequalities in children's cavities. So that sort of shows the flip side, which is the benefit of water fluoridation.
Right. And you said this is a long-time controversy,
is that right?
A long-time
controversy, yeah.
Okay. Do we see some resolution now from this with these articles?
Well, he said, just like with any form of research, one study doesn't resolve anything. And he said this was not the first study to look at water fluoridation and other outcomes aside from dental health, and it won't be the last.
Well, further research always needed.
Yep.
Okay. Our next article was by our writer, Rita Rubin, and it deals with cannabidiol products and whether we should really be using them. And probably, as any consumer knows, CBD products are everywhere. They're out there for people, they're out there for pets, and there are a lot of questions about whether they're effective, whether they are safe. And so part of Rita's study wrote about a meta-analysis of 81 studies, and it found that the effectiveness of these products, there isn't a whole lot of evidence to support that. And she also included some information from a California cannabis testing company showing that few of these products contain the level of CBD that's indicated on their label. And so a point that Rita made in her story is that anyone who wants to try CBD, try to get the products that are imported from Europe, which I think is a pretty interesting point, because the Europeans have been at this longer than we in the United States have been. And so they do have much more stringent limits for their products and perhaps maybe more attention to the quality of the product. And that point, I think, really kind of begs the question of whether we need some sort of regulatory attention from the FDA or some other regulatory group to scrutinize what's actually in these products so that the public can be more reassured about what they're taking and what they're using. Even if the products are benign, I kind of doubt that anybody really wants to be spending their hard-earned money on something that just isn't effective. So the National Institutes of Health announced that it is putting about $3 million into research for pain relief, because that's one of the main indications that CBD products have gotten attention for. So again, we're in a more research needed mode on this topic.
Yeah, because people are using these products for not just pain, although that is a major indication, but also sleeping better and anxiety. And there just isn't a lot of research yet. No,
there isn't. So it's definitely something that's going to be a topic of interest for the years to come, I think. And we will follow where it goes.
That's right. Another piece we published in December was by our writer, Bridget Keene. And it was about heritage diets and using dietary advice to combat chronic diseases. And so the concept here is that recommending a one-size-fits-all approach to healthy eating, such as the Mediterranean diet, which is what I think what a lot of physicians probably recommend, may not be that effective for everyone, because the components of the Mediterranean diet that we're familiar with may not be part of the way that people of different races and ethnicities eat. So Bridget gave some advice in this story, gave some resources. So if you want to check out the story, you'll be able to find some of these resources, including the National Lipid Association has created tear sheets on heart-healthy eating for groups like Indians, Latinos, and vegetarians. And Old Ways, which is a nutrition nonprofit, has created food pyramids and other resources specific for different ethnic groups and different patterns of eating, like vegetarianism and veganism. So sort of ways of adapting what we know about the Mediterranean diet to other heritages.
It's a very interesting story. I was really glad Bridget wanted to take this one on, because it goes with cultural competency in healthcare, which has been on the radar for decades now. And so it's really beneficial for people and interesting to see cultural competency weave its way into the dietary and nutrition areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things in the story was that patients are more willing to accept dietary changes that are more culturally appropriate and in line with their heritage, instead of a one-size-fits-all Mediterranean diet approach. The problem is that the research is lacking on many of these traditional diets. So physicians need more research so that they can confidently address dietary recommendations for patients of different cultures. So more research needed.
Another area for us to keep our eyes on in future stories too. And so another story we did, this was one that I approached. It talks about the link between having psoriasis and developing cancer, which I hadn't seen a whole lot of information about before. So that's why it caught my interest. And the study found that for some forms of cancer, having psoriasis really does increase the risk of those forms of cancer. And so it's interesting that obviously psoriasis is a condition that involves inflammation, which has been linked with colon cancer, so we see a link there. Also, some of the newer biologic treatments for psoriasis have been linked with cancer increases. Lymphoma is one. And so what the investigators concluded is that clinical guidelines for psoriasis really should take the cancer risk into greater consideration and have a little more attention paid to that, and also that to take a more holistic approach to psoriasis care too, to look at modifiable lifestyle risks that may reduce overall cancer risk too.
Right, so you based this story on a study in JAMA Dermatology, a meta-analysis.
Correct.
And so one of the interesting things that they found was that people with psoriasis have additional modifiable risks. So they're more likely to smoke, drink alcohol, and have weight control issues than people without the condition, which suggests that addressing some of these modifiable risks could help reduce their cancer risk.
Very true. I think that goes to the holistic approach.
All right. Okay. So we covered a lot of other things in the medical news section this month, so I'll just run down what some of those were. So we did a recurring piece called Neuro Nook, and so that's sort of a neuroscience-related roundup that included items on deep brain stimulation for tinnitus, tumors hijacking neurons in the brain center, and finally multiple sclerosis and immunizations. So if you're interested in any of those topics, check out that story. We also did a piece on assessing whether infertile men have a higher risk of prostate cancer. Super interesting topic. We did a story about napping. So for heart health, is napping good, bad, or neither? Check out the story to find out. We did a piece on a roundup of mind-related topics. So bedtime procrastination. Is it bad if you procrastinate going to bed? Relaxation-induced anxiety. That's counterintuitive. And finally, something on lonely tweeters. So you'll have to read that to find out what that's about. Let's see. And finally, I did a piece about banning large capacity magazines for guns and the association of those bans with fewer mass shootings and deaths. So these are all more pieces that you can check out if you visit JAMA.com.
Absolutely. So that's our summary for this month. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to read these articles at JAMA.com and subscribe to our podcast too. Thank you.
Thanks.